Welcome everyone who's joining. I'm just going to wait a few moments just to allow a few more people to enter the Zoom call, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think whilst people are joining, I'll just do a few words of introduction. So, welcome everyone to the Transport Planning Society annual lecture. I'm Nicola Kane. I'm the chair of the Transport Planning Society. I took over last year from Ben Plowden. Um, for those of you who don't know, the TPS is the only professional body focusing entirely on transport planning in the UK. And we represent now over 1,400 members and 65 partner organisations. We've just had our AGM, some of you may have joined that, but we've set out a really exciting programme of activity for the next year. So if you're not already a member, or if your organisation isn't signed up as a partner, we'd love to have you involved. Some of the activity that we deliver includes seminars, webinars such as this one, knowledge sharing activities, quizzes. We've got our international quiz coming up in a few weeks, later in March, social events and networking. We also have a policy panel, which some of you may have seen. We've now got over 60 members of the policy panel, broken up into smaller subgroups who focus on different, more specialist topics. They do responses to consultations, think pieces, and really trying to influence thinking in transport planning, influence central government, and so on. So that's a fantastic initiative if you want to get a bit more involved in a particular policy agenda with the society. We also have our skills programme, which is going from strength to strength. We have our transport planning professional chartered qualification, our professional development scheme, and a number of apprenticeships now, which we support. So lots of different ways of getting qualified through the TPS. And we'd love you to join as a skills partner or to get in touch with us if you're interested in working towards a qualification. We can really help you to develop your skills and capability and demonstrate that you are a well-rounded transport planner. We've just announced the winner of last year's bursary scheme, Victoria Isherwood, and we are now gearing up for this year's bursary award. So do look out for that. That will be launched in the summer. And we're also putting planning in place for this year's Transport Planning Day, which will be held in November. This year's theme is around transport planning for thriving people and places, so very aligned to today's topic of our lecture. So we'll be very much focusing on how transport shapes people's lives and their local places. So much more focused on the broader outcomes that good transport planning supports. And we are also planning our summer reception, which this year is going to be in Manchester. So that'll be happening in July. So again, look out for that. So that's my plug for the TPS over. Looks like we've got over 40 people now on the call. So I suggest we get started. I'm really delighted that we've got David Wilson here tonight, who was last year's Transport Planner of the Year. Very well deserved. David was led a lot of the work on Lambeth's Kerbside strategy, which is a really groundbreaking piece of work, an area of policy which I think has been maybe undervalued or overlooked in the past, but I think now is getting real visibility as we try to work out how to make best use of the scarce space we have, particularly in congested urban areas. So I think it's an area of policy that lots of authorities are now looking to develop, and will be looking to Lambeth for inspiration. So no pressure, David. So thank you for coming and speaking to us about the strategy tonight. We David's going to speak for about half an hour or so. I've got a few questions up my sleeve, but we also want to hear from you in the audience. So do use the Q&A function, and we may not get through all the questions, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. And then we'll look to wrap up the event at 7:45. So you can all have a bit of your evening left and go and get some dinner if you haven't eaten yet. With that, I will hand over to David, and he can introduce himself and the work that he's been doing on the Kerbside strategy. Over to you, David.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicola. Can I just check my screen is in fact sharing?
It is indeed, yeah.
Yeah, great. Nice one. Good to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Also very flattered by the award earlier on in the year. And yeah, I guess my immediate thought when it came through was there's so many people behind the strategy and so many people at Lambeth now working to deliver it. So very much see it's kind of a joint effort there. I'm David Wilson. I was Lambeth's climate strategy manager for transport and public realm is the job title. So it's basically our transport policy lead role. And I was in that role a few years ago now, hence the different job title, as you can see on here, which is kind of overseeing a wide range of transport strategy programs at Lambeth Council. So I'm here to talk about Lambeth's Kerbside strategy, and I guess I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour of what it is. It is a very abridged version, because I'm really keen to also talk about kind of the work we've been doing since, and also looking forwards ahead at some of the work that's to come, and also some general reflections of what it's been like since the publication. So first and foremost, I want to introduce the Kerbside. I'm sure many of us will have a vision of this. When we first picked up the Kerbside strategy, it became quite clear that we actually needed to define what that space was. Whilst we made a commitment to create the strategy, where exactly is it? And we define it as the place between where people walk and where cars and people cycling drive and wheel. And it is arguably one of the greatest opportunity areas in the typical street, with opportunity to do a wide range of things with it. Of course, I have, for sake of illustration, chosen a picture here of what most people would typically recognise as being the Kerbside, as the place where cars can be parked on the typical street. In Lambeth, the Kerbside is this massive chunk of our public realm, and it took a really large amount of time to create the stats on the right, which we'll get to. It spans 579 kind of kilometres, which would take you all the way from Lambeth right up into Edinburgh in Scotland, and in area, in kind of spatial terms, is 3.5 times the size of pretty much our biggest park, being Brockwell Park. So collectively, or in isolation, a small space. In collective terms, a really giant one, and one that we've not really had policy to cover until the Kerbside strategy. So a few things, and I'm aware there'll be people on the call that are not familiar with Lambeth, may not know where it is at all. So we are an inner London borough. We are a borough with kind of world-class transport links, with incredible bus train networks. We're also a borough that has a majority non-car owning household or accessing households. So 60% of households in Lambeth don't have access to a car. A crude calculation based off that stat alone would suggest that we're looking at about 81,000 households not having access to a car or van, and that equating to about 190,000 residents that may not be kind of using the space for car parking. And that's a pertinent point, because in Lambeth, we before we even really started diving into what this strategy might look like, we wanted to know exactly where we were today. And the pie chart on the left is another simple diagram that is the product of a really large amount of work, mapping out the Kerbside across the borough. In 2020, in Lambeth's Climate Action Plan, we made a commitment to we made a commitment to use 25% of the curbside sustainably, and to support the resilience of local communities in response to the climate emergency. So we in mapping out this space, we made a definition about what sustainable uses were and what non-sustainable uses were, and as per the pie chart, you can see that a really, really large proportion of that space is used for formal provision of parking or free parking. Actually, a quarter of our pie, of the curbside pie, they're used for double yellow lines, very large chunk used for single yellows. And I think that the bit that kind of changed our approach to this was upon the realization that we actually had 9% of our curbside, it's about 55 kilometers, if I remember correctly, being used for driveways. So, the crossover into a driveway in someone's front garden, making up actually more space being allocated to that curbside use currently than all of our defined sustainable uses of the curbside. And I think take quite a broad definition on what those uses might be. So trees, cycle lanes, bus stops, car clubs, electric vehicle charging, loading, disabled bays, loading and disabled bays, cycle hangers. It's a broad range of things that actually make up the smallest sliver of that curbside use. And in short, the strategy aims to by 2030 enable a quarter of that space to be used sustainably. To put that into context, as of 2022, that would equate to 110 kilometers more sustainable curbside use by 2030. And again, based off 2022 data, that would require us to reallocate 14 kilometers of curbside space to sustainable uses every year. Again, this is a whistle-stop tour, so it's an abridged description of the strategy, which includes 4 key priority areas for those sustainable uses. Priority 1 is enabling accessible and active travel. So the accessible component there is very much thinking about using curbside space to ensure that our footways are free and clear, and also to support active travel. So cycle parking, secure cycle parking, and general things of that nature. The second priority is really about thinking about the curbside as a social space, a place for people to enjoy and to kind of sit out and chat to their neighbours, and that manifests itself in things like parklets, community parklets, businesses having greater access to tables and chairs licensing within the curbside. Our third priority is all about climate resilience, so increasing our resilience to climate change, so greening of a broad church of greening, so trees, depaved spaces, biodiverse build-outs, you name it, fitting within that category. And then the fourth being about reducing traffic and emissions from transport. So here we're thinking about ways that are ways of supporting people. In the example of this one is to move around, using motor vehicles, but enabling them to do so through things like electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging, through the rollout of car clubs, and various other things, micromobility fitting in within that category. Another core element of the strategy, and really the thing that underpins a lot of what I will talk about in the coming section, is the curbside basics. And I linger intentionally on this picture of the concept of parking minimums in the States, and one that was really quite an inspiration, albeit on the complete other side of the coin, in terms of what we thought might be minimum levels of service for the curbside space. What does a kind of a bare minimum transition towards 25% sustainable uses look like? And we call those our Lambeth curbside basics. And they span those 4 priority areas. I'm not going to go into much more detail because otherwise I won't get through some of the stuff that we've been doing since. So I will move swiftly on to just kind of at the point we published that strategy, what did we do? And actually there was quite a lot to do still, by the scope and scale of the ambition of the strategy. I'm sure that's no surprise to everybody in the call. And enabling us to take that static picture of our curbside that was in the strategy and translate it into something that would be a sustainable, repeatable, measurable version of our curbside was actually really essential to get ourselves going. Greatly enabled by the very immediate transition to digital traffic orders in Lambeth. Unfortunately, not quite in time for us to make those baselines, but is now working as an extremely useful tool to enable this to be digitized and automated. So with those traffic orders, we had to do quite a lot of work, actually. We work with our supplier for digital traffic orders, Appiway, to plug a lot of gaps in the data. And there are a lot of gaps. I'm sure the hawk-eyed of you will recognize that there's quite a lot of the sustainable uses I've described there that are not backed up by a specific traffic order. There's not a traffic order for bike hangers or for parklets. So these are additional bits of data we had to add to all of our curbside uses so that we could see the nuance in the picture. So the double yellow lines that might be underneath some of these things, but are still a sustainable use under our definitions. So in plugging those gaps, we have enabled to great effect, I think, the automated monitoring of our curbside. So someone said it before, but we're very firm believers that if you can't measure it, we cannot manage it. And for a great deal of work, we now have this automated process that through the digitization of traffic orders, we are monitoring our curbside beyond simply the traffic orders themselves. And yes, hopefully you can see we're on 6% of the pie before. So it's been a few years now, and we are pleased to say that we are now at 10.5%, which is actually a significant increase. There's a slide to follow that talks through what's included in the work that we've been doing since the strategy was adopted. Something I'm really found fascinating about the ability for the digital traffic orders is that actually it enables us to do a much more detailed picture of the specific uses as well. So again, looking at our curbside, we're able to then take that and think back to those curbside basics. So those commitments that we've made around having bike hangers every 100 meters or bike hire within 5 minutes walk, these very specific measurable commitments that we've made can actually very easily now, I say very easily, it was a lot of work, be translated into a very specific delivery plan. So in the case of bike hangers, we have a good understanding of what that density needs to look like, and because of the live data input that is in the digital traffic orders, this is all easily calculated, and we have a dashboard now that kind of against the different uses is telling us we are here in our delivery against this. Here's our short. Here's what we need to deliver over the next. This is as you can see, a slide from a few years ago. So 4 years left to deliver until 2030. Doesn't 2030 come around quickly, I think, on a regular basis. Another point around some ways that we've been using tech to help us to do this kind of, so it's a strategy at a borough level, but it also talks about hyperlocal kind of change on streets. And that actually kind of threw up a lot of questions and as we went towards delivering the strategy. So we've been using LiDAR surveys. So I'm sure many people on the call know what that is, but it's the kind of the vision that autonomous vehicles would be using to navigate the street. And crucially, it's very accurate. More accurate than OS based maps. And actually this has become particularly pertinent to quite a few conversations around what footways are sufficiently wide for us to put things on them, and where should we really be prioritizing curbside space to ensure that we meet our curbside basic, of which enabling 2 meter footways was one. So yes. And oh yes, I forgot I had some animation. So the green areas all highlighted as spaces where we could afford to use some of that footway space whilst maintaining 2 meter spaces, clear and accessible footways, and then in red, the places where we shouldn't be doing that. So the next section really just focuses on some key things that we've been doing since, beyond the kind of monitoring and program development side of things. And I'll start with, first of all, just a very quick overview of kind of the actually some stats that we published in a 3-year report on our progress against the curbside strategy last year, I believe. And yeah, so the headline is, since then, we have delivered 65 kilometers of sustainable curbside, as I said, 10.5%. And I think important to highlight that this is enabled by teams across the council, definitely not just the transport team. There's teams across the council working to do that, but crucially local communities and also private partners. That was one of the things that we were really clear about in the strategy itself, was that we can't do this on our own. This is a vision for what the curbside could look like, but we know we're going to need to work with communities and private partners to get there. And in doing so, we have delivered a really wide range of traffic filters for our kind of Healthy Neighbourhoods programme, really extensive sustainable urban drainage across the borough now. We've also delivered 9 kilometres of separated cycle tracks, so of course being one of our key sustainable uses. 235 micromobility bays. I think that number's about to be out of date by about the order of 100. Again, ensuring in the context of micromobility that we provide the curbside space so that we're not having issues with parking on footways. Of course, everybody will know that is an ongoing challenge, a very real challenge of which there's a lot of work behind the scenes to tackle. Then we've also, 3,000, almost 4,000 secure cycle spaces for our bike hangers, and 348 new electric vehicle chargers, of which you can see an example of one of the kind of Lambeth branded electric vehicle chargers. Another core element of the strategy was actually, whilst we're talking about those 25% sustainable use, absolutely we did not ignore the 75% that even in 2030 would be used for principally motor vehicle parking of some form, and the curbside pricing principles were a key element that's actually laid the groundwork for a lot of work that we've done since adopting the strategy on a kind of a controlled parking zone and permit pricing perspective. As you can see, they are simple principles, where vehicles that produce more greenhouse gases, we say should pay more. If your vehicle produces more exhaust or non-exhaust pollutants, again, you should pay more. And crucially, I think, and an interesting one to take forward is around if your vehicle takes up more space and increases congestion, through these principles, where we also suggest that motorists should be paying more for those, recognizing the cost that all 3 of those things have on everyone. And again, we had a curbside basic here, which was working towards a vision where we had controlled parking zones operating across the whole of the borough, and the cost of accessing that curbside space is set in line with clear, logical, rational pricing principles. And we've done a lot of work in this space since, with a great deal of thanks to our parking policy team, and lots of people across the council, certainly. In line with those principles, we have, I think actually I like this as a first example, is reduced the cost of a cycle hanger space from £42 to £30 a year. So incentivizing and enabling people to use those spaces. We've also introduced emissions-based pricing for, I think, all actually, I think now parking permits in the borough. So those are all linked back to emissions. We've also extended our diesel surcharge, so thinking about those other types of pollutants, that now spans all diesel vehicles, and really thinking about the third principle there. We've now apply a surcharge for second and subsequent permits held by a single household. So generally, kind of really just wrapping up our approach to pricing of the curbside in line with a clear set of guiding principles. There's more work to do. And later at the end of 2025, we also put out a call for evidence to look into the evidence behind the impact of oversized vehicles on road danger in particular. So the curbside strategy is nice, well aligned with Lambeth's road danger reduction strategy. And of course, when we're considering using curbside space and the pricing for curbside space as a policy tool, the impact of road danger and oversized vehicles is a really interesting one there, and lots of work going on in the background, and a keen eye being on some of the local authorities that have made some steps towards implementing this in the last year or so. I think don't want to be too kind of pat on the back. Like there's absolutely been some challenges, some very real challenges. We made, very, very kind of big commitments, and we have had to adapt. There are quite a few examples of that, where we found through implementation and through kind of doing some of this extra survey work, for example, it's become clear that some of those commitments were at tension with some of the other things that as a council we're trying to achieve, either within the curbside strategy itself or within our commitments around street greening. And this is an example where our commitment for 2 metre footways actually came a little bit at loggerheads with our commitment to plant lots of trees. And that's really because planting, as I'm sure lots of people on this call will be very well aware, planting in the carriageway costs a lot more. It really does. There's a lot more to navigate in terms of utilities. You've got carriageways to dig out as opposed to footways, and you're also not making use of existing tree pits that may have been in place already. So in this context, we thought it was, we kind of came to a position where we thought it was a reasonable adjustment to this to maintain 1.5 metre footways, which is now the default minimum where we're talking about street trees. And that's enabled, of course, the rollout of lots more trees as well, which is great. We also absolutely recognised that the curbside strategy did not cover everything. And there's a couple of very specific areas that we felt this was more than we could do within that strategy, and it requires really its own dedicated policy. The first of those was adopted a couple of years ago. So that's our electric vehicle strategy. So whilst we talk about that in headline terms within the curbside strategy, it's its own beast. And there's so I highly recommend, if of interest, to take a look at Lambeth's EV strategy. And another piece of work under development is our freight and servicing strategy. So we absolutely recognise loading space as a sustainable use within the curbside. But there's so much to talk about there, and so much to learn, I think, about how freight and servicing operates in our borough. And I think it's a real area where there's a lot of work to do to just understand where you are today, and that work is underway, and as part of our freight and servicing strategy. Then a few key highlights, and I'm a big fan of pictures, as I'm sure you've become very quickly aware. We've been trialing a few new curbside uses. Not super clear from this picture, but this is our first business bike hanger, which is an offer that we've provided for businesses in the Waterloo area, where if the business doesn't have space within the curtilage of their building, there's lots of old buildings, and businesses sharing a single unit, where it might not be possible to provide those facilities within, and therefore in this circumstance we've trialled with, I think, great success, the ability for businesses to use bike hangers to serve their employees. And I do like to finish on a sweeping picture of a typical view of Lambeth's curbside in a specific area called Kennington Oval. So this is the wall on the right is the boundary to the Kia Oval cricket ground. And you can see how this curbside was being used a few years ago. And the curbside strategy really kind of integrates neatly into lots of other things that we're doing. So wider projects looking at healthy streets, and in this case, a program that we've got called our Reimagined program. And I'll just let the picture do the talking for this one. And you can see what it looks like right now. So this is a project integrating school streets, integrating kind of an area-wide approach to traffic management, whilst really rethinking what that curbside space, of course, looked like within that area. And this is a trial that's now been made permanent. Just a quick looking forward, I do have an eye on my clock. So yes, so there's definitely, it would be remiss for me to say that there aren't a lot of challenges in delivering the curbside strategy. Absolutely there are. We know that we need to continue to work with local communities, to continue to work with private partners to help create the vision that was set out within that strategy. And one of the ways that we've been kind of really diving into at the moment is looking at curbside health scores. So of course I've been through two of these slides before, but you'll see how this one's different. So again, using those digitized traffic orders, we're now zooming in on what that looks like at a neighborhood level. So all of that data is, it works at the macro scale, but it also works at the micro. And we're in the process of developing a tool that will enable us to define a specific area and draw out the stats against the curbside, against our parking strategy, as to how that space is being used. So we really see this as having the potential to be a tool that informs future controlled parking zone design, as a tool that acts as a baseline for any area-wide schemes that we might have. And also crucially, and one of the key drivers in my mind right now is how we can use this in the development management process. So when we have new developments coming through, well, we can draw a radius around a certain development and get this real complete picture of how curbside is being used, and considering what, if any, mitigations might be required as a result, with kind of a real good evidence base where we are now. And yes, so I will quickly wrap up. Very keen to move on to questions. So yeah, I would say very much we see the curbside strategy as being another string to the bow of our general approach to creating healthier streets. And I say ours, Transport for London's healthy streets approach is something that we are fervent kind of believers in, and it forms the backbone of pretty much all of our strategies. So the curbside has provided this integrated policy backing, and I think crucially a clear story on how this space has been used and how we might use it differently going forwards. We see the curbside as being part of this healthy streets, where we know that reducing the dominance of motor traffic is one of the most effective ways of reducing road danger. We know that when we do that, we enable people to feel confident walking, scooting, wheeling, cycling, traveling actively on our streets. We also know that that's a key method in which we're going to get the mode shift away from private vehicles that helps clean up our air, helps reduce the CO2, and you can see a crude graph of our net zero commitment mapped out against our emissions from CO2. And again, this forming this kind of process that is the one that we're following, and of which the curbside is a component part. I think through the curbside, as we've been delivering it, we've really kind of seen the desire from local communities in all sorts of parts of the borough for both having curbside for movement, but also crucially as a place as well, and kind of recognizing the ability for our local streets to have that place function through things like our parklets program, enabling people to use that space in a different way. I think it's something that I've been asked before, and I somewhat expect questions on it now. The strategy is very ambitious. It set a vision for 2030. And like many visions for 2030, the path towards getting there was not super clear from the outset. But I think through implementation in the last few years, we've really seen that having that clear strategy has driven us towards working, like figuring out how we can get to those goals. So thinking about oversized vehicle charging, or thinking about expanding our parklets program. Some of these things are pretty tricky to deliver. There's lots of work, further work that came out of the strategy, but having that basis there has been a really essential element on kind of just driving forward that change. And Nicola, that is my final slide. And thank you very much, everybody.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, David. Fascinating, and so much to get into in the conversation. I think Lucy Saunders is on the call actually, so she'll be very pleased to hear the references to healthy streets. I wanted to just kick off by asking a bit more about engagement, because this is a pretty wide-ranging strategy. It's very bold, very progressive. How did you engage with local residents and businesses, both in terms of the strategy as a whole and building buy-in and consensus around it, and now as you're rolling it out, working out what you're going to deliver where, and getting communities engaged at that more micro level?
Do you want me to take that one straight
Yeah,
away?
that's
No
great.
problem. Yeah, of course. So, in terms of engagement on the strategy, I think there's a slide that I haven't included today that I have done in some in other presentations, is that the curbside strategy was really seen in the organization as a way of implementing a number of key things that we'd engaged on a few years before. So principally Lambeth's transport strategy, of which we had a very broad and extensive engagement on far-reaching engagement approach. And then following that, also the climate action plan, and which was the product of a citizens' assembly. Actually, Lambeth's first, I think, the first Citizens Assembly on climate change, hopefully I'm not wrong there, was also one of the things that led towards this commitment about having 25% of our curbside use sustainably. So that we very much see it as an implementation kind of plan for things that we had committed to already and engaged on already. So that kind of that was like lays the foundation for the strategy itself. And then there was extensive engagement, albeit in kind of quite targeted ways on various components to the strategy. So, but both internally, and actually I have a slide that I often include around how much we were trying to capture the ways that people that might not usually think about this space felt about it. So we kind of spoke to children's and social care about the ability for parklets to provide kind of neutral, safe spaces on streets where they might otherwise not be available. We also undertook a lot of targeted engagement with disability groups, Transport for All being a local charity based in the borough, but I'm sure many people on the call will be aware of their outputs, and various others. So yeah, from that strategy basis, that's kind of really the response on that one. Then, of course, as we move forwards, of course, the strategy does not omit, of course, any of the need to engage on all projects that affect the curbside as we look to, for example, in the Kennington Oval scheme that I had, extensive engagement took place before that to understand how curbside was being used already, what the traffic movements were, really having those kind of detailed conversations with local stakeholders. And again, whilst it's a strong policy backing for the rationale, but every context is its own, and of course we continue to engage on those local changes as and when they come through.
That's brilliant. I've got lots of questions coming in. Just one more from me. You've talked about kind of, you're obviously measuring progress towards your target and how much curb space is being allocated to sustainable uses. Have you got any sense of the sort of broader outcomes that it's driving, or is it too early to say in terms of kind of car ownership, mode shift, road safety, any of those wider measures?
Yes, I would say there's more work to be done on that space. So certainly that's something that we're looking at as we kind of look towards some of the more tricky bits of parking policy that are kind of being kind of explored at the moment. I think the overarching stat that I'm recalling instantly without any crib notes is that since, and you can't attribute it specifically to this strategy, I think we have to look at the Healthy Streets projects that we've delivered in the round, of which there are so many, it's quite hard to isolate. But we're currently on a very, very good trajectory towards our 85% commitment for active travel or sustainable travel by 2030, which is again actually another commitment of our climate action plan. So we're at 81% now, and that represents an increase in the acceleration towards that goal. So obviously there's a lot of other metrics, and there's a lot of work we'd like to do to kind of capture this at a broader level. We do have some irons in the fire on thinking about the long-term impact of this kind of work.
And actually, Graham Jones did ask a specific question about the targets and why 25% and not 20 or 50.
Yep. Yeah, so that was really a product of the climate action plan and the engagement that came from that. So that is ultimately where that 25% figure came from. We did, you can only have to look at the timeline to know that we did the very detailed bit of baselining work afterwards and realised just how little we had now relative to kind of what that ambition was. So yeah, I think it's also very easy to communicate. It's a very easily defined amount of space. So obviously the work that came afterwards really added the meat to the bones as to the target and what it meant in practice.
Presumably, once you hit that, you might be looking at the next.
It's who knows? Let's aim for there for now, and we'll of course, I'm sure, come back and review if that's the case.
And actually, before I forget, Graham's also asked if we could just give a shout out to the TPS policy paper, Just the Ticket, Parking Policy for Lower Carbon Travel, which is available on the TPS website, and lots of ideas about how parking can support good transport planning choices. So yeah, that's just another hopefully useful resource for anyone who's grappling with these issues. Let's have a look what else we've got here. Someone asked about David Lahn, who said he's not from London, but he was wondering about what your interaction was with TfL and maybe other local councils in London or other boroughs looking to follow what you've done, and have you been working with any local authorities outside of London as well to sort of share best practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, kind of thinking about within our borough, we've been having lots of conversations with Transport for London. There's definitely some work going on within the low carbon transport programme, looking at what a collective integrated approach to curbside might look like across London. So and various toolkits. I believe if anybody's on the call, I'm sure they'll plug some of the stuff that's been published through that programme at London councils. I think one of the things that we really getting to grips with Transport for London's curbside use in our borough is something that we're really kind of keen to continue exploring. And yeah, absolutely, we've kind of I want to give a big plug out now to Tash Hartco, who is our curbside strategy program manager, and actually I would say she's been doing the bulk of the work in the last few years in really kind of spreading talking people through how we came to our particular approach to managing the curbside space, the challenges that we've had through that process, of which there's much more than I've included in the slide deck today, which is, I'm sure, no surprise given the scope of the strategy itself. We've had conversations with Dublin, New York, I think Vancouver. It's been very, very fascinating that it has resonated with people in our industry from far afield, and keen to keep doing it, basically. Yeah, there was a lot of head scratching in the early days, thinking about how we're going to kind of even just figure out the data side of things. I look at those pie charts and think about months of work. So
yeah, no, you can see that there's a huge amount of work, and I guess you're learning as you deliver as well, aren't you? And continuing to refine the strategy. I had a couple of questions about, maybe some of the trade-offs and the political challenges. So John Cartledge asked how supportive Lambeth's councillors have been when you're in terms of making the case for the strategy. And Keith Homer asked about kind of loss of parking revenue from on street parking, and councils often don't want to lose even 2 or 3 parking spaces because of the loss of revenue and the impact on their finances. How have you dealt with those issues?
Yes, so I guess in terms of ward councillors, I mean, the strategy was adopted we've got a cabinet system in Lambeth, and it was adopted by cabinet. Of course, so real strong political drive for the initial adoption of the strategy, 100%. Of course, the nitty gritty and the real challenging bit is looking towards actually implementing the changes on the ground. So I think the simple answer is we've had lots of challenges. Absolutely, we are not impervious. Well, like those challenging conversations that we have with local stakeholders absolutely take place on a near daily basis about any reallocation of curbside space. I guess the foundation of having a really strong policy backing and narrative behind it is a very good starting point, but that will always be there, and I don't think we could ever. I don't expect that to change. And I think the answer on kind of ward councillor support, again, will vary based on specific things being proposed. If people have been knocking on our door, requesting a bike hanger for the last 2 years, and we deliver one, that's its very own circumstance versus kind of some of the other things that might come through, or some of the very real challenges that come about through kind of increases to parking charges. So, it's such a broad picture. I probably can't give it one answer, but happy to share some example reports and some of the feedback that we've got on some of the projects that reallocated a lot of curbside, because you'll kind of get a sense of the themes and the kind of the general kind of objections that we might get through a statutory consultation process. So.
And presumably that as you roll it out, you've got more examples of you can point to show how it works in action. That
absolutely, yeah, yeah. I think that is a really big part of kind of getting a few years down the line, is that reaction that you can sometimes get when it's a change that people maybe aren't familiar with, but when you can point to a local area where it's happened and they're like, actually, there's that park outside the coffee shop on Railton Road, and I've been there, and it's really nice, and it's got big sunflowers in it in spring. So just those very tangible benefits that come from a broad strategy being delivered in practice. So.
One just final question from Katie O'Neill. She says she loved the presentation. She said they're rolling out similar measures in Glasgow, and there's been quite a bit of public backlash about the risk to the high street of introducing paid meters and also the risk of parking displacement to areas outside of CPZ boundaries. Have you been able to generate kind of data for what the impact's been? Maybe that comes back to one of my original questions, but yeah, any evidence that can help to kind of maybe push back on some of those potential objections?
Yeah, I mean, again, I cannot speak to knowing anything about the Glasgow context. I think what might well be different in Lambeth is that we are about 75% controlled parking zone coverage. So most of the borough is within a controlled parking zone. There's many inner London boroughs that are 100% coverage now. So I think possibly at a different point in the conversation, I think one thing that we've learned is that, kind of, you've got to bring people on this journey. Of course you do. And sometimes the kind of controlled parking is kind of actually one of those first steps into people thinking, okay, streets are managed, access to the curbside is managed, and it can often be a segue through to those conversations that come after that. We've got a few projects kind of in the pipeline, really looking at curbside space within the local high street context, and we're really keen to kind of dive into some of those challenges. I'm sure people on this call are familiar with the pedestrian pound and supporting local high streets through healthy streets, both economically as well as the various other things that kind of trying to achieve through that. So very happy to share. We have got some components which to answer that very specific question, there's some components of some recent decision reports, Nicola, that I'm happy to link to, because it talks about some of those the curbside space or the parking space being lost, what the potential impact around revenue implications can be from that, and also some of the kind of things that we actually learned through putting some trials in. So there's some public information that you'll never find unless I tell you where it is. So it is in published decision reports, just to confirm.
Perfect. That's amazing. And actually, we had a request for a copy of your slide, so I'm hoping that's all right if we can share.
I'm sure it will be. Yeah, I will follow up.
And obviously this is recorded as well, so you can share it with colleagues who maybe missed it live but want to watch it back. We're out of time, unfortunately. I think we probably could have talked for another half an hour or more. Thank you so much, David. That's brilliant. Yeah. Really inspirational work. Congratulations to you and your whole team. Well done for getting Transport Planner of the Year. Very well deserved.
Yes, very flattered. Very flattered.
And you're on LinkedIn, aren't you? If people want to
indeed, yeah.
Get in touch with you directly. So thanks for your time this evening. Thank you for everyone who joined. You can go and relax now, have some dinner if you haven't had it already. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and look out for some of our other forthcoming Transport Planning Society events. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.